basic ideas of astrology is as above, so below, as within, so without. And we're going to look at the weather that affects all of us. You know, on a day like today when it's particularly cold for this neck of the woods, some people like the cold, some people don't. We react differently to the weather, and just because it's sunny or rainy or hot or cold doesn't really say anything about how you react individually. So the first part of this evening we'll be talking about the cosmic weather, and then we'll take a 10 or 15 minute break as we always do, and we'll draw names for 3 charts that we will look at, and we will talk there about how the cosmic weather affects these individual people, really as a way of looking at how the larger cycles affect the individual cycles. I would like to say that I am here this month, as you can see, solo, without my cohort in crime, Jeff Jower, who is enjoying the sunny warmth of Hawaii this week. And so we send him our best across the great blue. He's missing the Seattle sun. It actually has been a bit rainy in Hawaii. Let's jump right into this month, because this month is a month that once we jump right into, it's going to be hard to get out of. And what I mean by that is that if I had one word to describe February, it would be sluggish. Now, for those of us who live in Seattle, those of you who are watching on the internet don't understand the real meaning of slug-ish, because the slug is the state creature. And but it is sluggish here. Things move slowly in February for a number of reasons, and I think the largest looming reason is the fact that Mercury, the planet of communication, Mercury, the messenger planet, Mercury, the planet that connects with all interactions. Information comes and goes. We speak, we listen, we speak, we listen. This is Mercury's function as the messenger. And when Mercury 3 times a year turns retrograde, it often means that communication is sluggish. Now, I'll talk more about Mercury retrograde in just a few minutes, but for the record, it actually turns retrograde on February 6th, and it completes its retrograde cycle and turns direct on the next to last day of the month, actually on the last day of the month, February 28th. And so virtually all month of February is a Mercury retrograde. And even though we're sitting here on the 5th, is today the 5th? Wednesday the 5th? Even though we're sitting here on the 5th, the first few days of the month already have the impending, looming Mercury retrograde, because Mercury has to slow down in order for it to change directions. Now, it doesn't really change directions. It just looks that way from Earth's point of view, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. But I want to back up a moment and talk about why this particular Mercury retrograde, I believe, makes for even a more sluggish month or 3-week period than a retrograde Mercury usually does. When I ran the transits for the month of February, which we always do prior to this evening so we can see the main events of the month, I immediately was taken by the fact that nothing happens this month. Okay, that's an overstatement. But there's not a lot of planetary activity. And then it dawned on me why. You see, most of the aspects that are made astrologically, aspects are angles. When 2 planets line up or make a 90-degree angle or a 120-degree angle, when they make harmonies with each other, this is what we astrologers call aspects. And this is where the action occurs when 2 planets hum with each other, or they create a pleasant note like a chord you like in music, or an unpleasant dissonant chord. Well, aspects are normally made by the faster moving planets to the slower moving planets. And the fastest moving of the true planets are Mercury, Venus, and Mars. And here's the deal. Venus was retrograde most of January. Mars is retrograde all of March and on into April. What this means is that in order for a planet to look like it turns retrograde, it has to slow down. Think of a pendulum on a clock going back and forth. The pendulum's moving fastest in the middle of the cycle. That's the fastest movement. But as it gets to the extreme on either side, it needs to slow down, actually come to a stop in order for it to reverse directions. So when planets go retrograde, around the time that they slow down to stop to go retrograde, or around the time that they are moving backwards and they slow down in their backwards movement to go forward again, the planets don't move very fast. What that means for this sluggish month is that Venus, although it's turned direct, isn't moving very fast. It takes weeks for it to gain its normal speed. On the other hand, Mars, which doesn't turn retrograde until March, barely moves an inch. Okay, it moves probably several hundred million inches, but from Earth's point of view, it doesn't move very far. It actually just moves a few degrees. Mars is at the end of Libra, and it stays there all month, and it turns retrograde on, I have these dates here, Mars turns retrograde on March 1st. But the fact is that it barely makes any aspects all of February, and Venus too, even though she's moving direct again, she just doesn't make a whole lot of aspects this month. So what that means is that Mercury, which is slowing down to turn retrograde, turns retrograde tomorrow, goes backwards slowly all month, then turns around and goes forward again, but it has to slow down in order to go forward at the end of the month, that between Venus moving direct now, Mercury turning retrograde and being retrograde all month, and Mars, which is direct but ain't moving much all month, we don't have a lot of planetary activity. Now, in astrology, it's important to understand that everything is important. So when two planets make an angle with each other, that creates noise. It creates event. It creates something happens. When lots of stuff is going on, we get busy periods of time, like the holiday season, back around late December on through the first week of January. The sky was pretty busy. And even though it corresponded with the holidays, which are busy anyhow, that kind of creates a lot of noise. It creates a lot of events. It stirs up a lot of stuff. Through February, there's not a lot of activity. Now, what this does is something that's very important, and that is, did you ever notice that you cannot be feeling great all week? You can be working really hard, but you got to go to school or you got to go to work or whatever, but it's like you're looking forward to finally having the weekend off, and Saturday morning comes and you wake up and you feel like crap, you're sick. And it's almost like you didn't have time all week to get sick, so now on the weekend nothing's happening, and so you have time and the body kind of goes through its sick thing. And there's something that's very annoying and backwards about that. However, astrologically, a similar thing occurs. And that is that at times when there's not a lot of noise going on up there, we seem to have the time, the bandwidth, the mental space to process, to integrate that which we haven't had time to deal with when we've been running around in circles and when we've been so busy. Do you understand what I'm saying? Does this make sense to you? So from that standpoint, one of the key pieces to February is taking enough time to actually integrate those things which we haven't had a chance to integrate yet. Let me now say a few words about Mercury retrograde in general, because unfortunately, there's a lot of things in astrology that are passed on as gospel, as truth, and many of them come from an ancient period of time where those truths may not be relevant today. For example, my classic illustration here is that there are aspects that the Greeks interpreted that if you had this particular aspect, you would die by the death of a wild dog. You know, you would be killed by a wild dog. Now, maybe in places in Greece in 200 BC, that was more common a way of dying than dying in an automobile accident. Don't know. But there are things that are not as relevant today as they may have been at one point in time, or are different because our lives are so different. So let's talk about Mercury retrograde for a moment, because of all the planets, Mercury is the planet that goes retrograde more times than any other planet. Mercury turns retrograde 3 times a year for about 3 weeks each time. Now, what that means is this, that we lose perspective because Mercury gets closer to Earth, and we can't see that it's really going forward, but going forward less fast, slower, I guess that's the word we use. Yeah. It's going slower than we are on Earth. Now, what actually happens is that we have Mercury going around the sun. And it goes around the sun once every 88 days, about 4 times a year. In fact, the idea of dividing a season into a year into 4 seasons, one Mercury cycle around the sun is roughly 1/4 of a year, or 1 season. It's 88 days. So as Mercury is going around the sun once every 88 days, on Earth, here we are going around the sun once every 365 days, which means Mercury is going around the sun 4 times in the same time that we on Earth go around once. What this means is that Mercury, as it's moving around the sun, comes between the Earth and the sun 3 times during that year. Mercury comes between the Earth and the sun. Then Mercury goes around and it lines up on the far side of the sun. And then it comes back around about 2.5 months later, 3 months later, and actually 3-4 months later, because it has to catch up to the Earth again. Thank you for my drink. Excuse me. It has to catch up with the sun, and it has to catch up with the Earth, and as it does, as it comes between the Earth and the sun, from Earth's point of view, it looks like it's moving backwards. It looks like it slows down, and it looks like it moves backwards. It doesn't really move backwards. But, the word planet comes from a Greek word, planeta, which means to wander. The planets wander through the sky. They move, from Earth's point of view, they look like they're moving forward against the backdrop of stars, and then they go backwards, and then they go forward. And that retrograde motion is because of the planet's proximity or closeness to Earth. It's the same thing. I know some of you have heard me say this before. If you're on a train and you're going across a valley and there's a freight train on the other side of the valley, and you're going faster than it, you look out the window of your passenger train and you can see that the train on the other side of the valley against the mountains or the trees, you can see that you're going faster than it, but you can see that it's moving forward. Then, as these 2 train tracks come closer and closer and closer together, what happens is that if the 2 tracks are side by side, you look out the window and you're sure that that train next to you is moving backwards. It's not, but you can't see the background. You lose perspective. It's the same thing in a car. Sometimes you're at a stoplight, and all of a sudden you think that that the car next to you is rolling backwards, but you're actually moving forward. This is why planets move backwards. We're trying to keep track of the time for YouTube here. And yeah. Okay, so we are going to take a very short break. We have to re-hit the camera every, huh? Yeah, it's a shortcoming of Soul Food Books. Are we ready? All right, this time I will actually keep track. The deal was that I was going to keep track of these 15 minutes. Okay, here we go. All right. So here's the concept that the planets don't really move backwards, but from Earth's point of view, they look like they're covering the same ground in the sky. Ground in the sky. That didn't work at all. They're covering the same area of sky that they recently covered. The ancient logic about retrograde planets, pretty simply, is it ain't good. That there's something wrong with the planets moving backwards, that things become more difficult, that Mercury, which is connected with communication, when Mercury goes retrograde, communication becomes mucked up. And you'll hear astrologers spout the party line. When Mercury is retrograde, don't sign contracts. Don't get married. Don't buy a car. Don't buy a house. Don't make major moves. Don't make major decisions when Mercury is retrograde because the things that you do when Mercury is retrograde quickly unravel. Well, being the heretic that I am, I think that's a pile of crap. I think that just as many airplanes, maybe not just as many, so it may not be a huge pile of crap, but there's crapness here. That every astrologer I know has had flawless airplane journeys with Mercury retrograde. Every person I know has been delayed at some bizarre airport with Mercury not retrograde. It's not as simple as that. But there is an underlying mechanism. And if we understand it, February can be a really powerful time. And that is this. Normally, Mercury, of all the true planets, moves faster than any of them. I mean, Mercury whizzes, it whizzes fast, it whizzes ahead fast. Having a language problem tonight. Okay. I'm having a language problem. Mercury must be ready to go retrograde. Some of you know I write a daily column, and because Mercury is turning retrograde tomorrow, it's just about stationary right now, and the horoscopes that I wrote yesterday, I ended up having to rewrite 8 out of 12 of the signs because there was just something not right with any of them. It was like a total study in Mercury retrograde. Now here's the thing. Because we're so used to Mercury going ahead fast, that when it slows down or when it covers ground that it's already covered, we get frustrated. You see, there's a concept in astrology that says that the closer a planet is to Earth in its normal cycle, the louder that energy, the louder that planet is. The farther away it is from Earth, the softer, the quieter the signal. Think of it like a radio station. The 50,000 watt radio station in your backyard is going to fill your radio, whereas the quieter radio station that's far away, you may have trouble picking up. So, when a planet is retrograde, it's closer to Earth, which means that now that Mercury is getting ready to turn retrograde, the function of communication, information, sending and receiving data, short journeys and trips, all language is louder than it normally is. It's not worse, it's louder. But there's a problem. Imagine that you drive over the same bridge every day back and forth to work, like some of you here in Seattle might. And imagine that you're used to the traffic. But then imagine one day there's 4 times as much traffic on that bridge, and it stays that way every day for 3 weeks. It changes your pattern. You can get pissed off. You get frustrated. In fact, the bridge may even take more wear and tear, and maybe even a bridge, I'm not saying that any of our bridges would collapse, but the idea is that if you have wires with signals going back and forth over them, and all of a sudden the load increases, you may end up getting some frayed wires. So what happens is that when Mercury turns retrograde, our neurons can fray. Our nerves can become fractious. We can misunderstand what we're hearing because so much information is coming in. We can send an email to a wrong person. We can think that we heard something, but we hear something else. We can jump to the wrong conclusions. Or, and I'll give you my best example, is we can decide tomorrow morning, on Thursday morning, February 6th, we can decide, I think I need a new car. I'm going to go out and look and see what I can stir up. And you go out that afternoon and you fall in love with a purple car and you go, I love it. I'm going to buy it. And you buy it. Now, it may be that you bought a really stupid car. It may be non-functional. The color's nice. You didn't do your research. You didn't think it through, but you just fell victim to the classic Mercury retrograde bad signing contract time. And that is, you do something under duress. You think you got to do it now. You think that this is the time. There's that sense of urgency, that sense of like, I absolutely must do it in this moment. And that's really where the bad rap of Mercury retrograde decision-making, contract signing comes from. So how do we use Mercury retrograde this month? One of the ways is to think about all those decisions and all those things that you've been thinking about for the last month, because that's the area that Mercury will be retrograding back over. And so the question is, what can you gain from reviewing, from reconsideration, from rethinking? Any word with re in front of it, like retrograde or retrograde, any word with re in front of it, to do again, is a good Mercury retrograde word. So in fact, January, when Venus was retrograde, and we may have been re-evaluating relationships and love and how we make money and all those Venusian things. And now February, when Mercury is retrograde, and we might in fact be reviewing those plans and those ideas that we have and things that we want to say to people and so on. And in March and early April, when Mars is retrograding, and that Mars actually, March, April, and on through mid-May, because the March retrograde is a 10-week period. When Mars is retrograde, we may feel frustrated because we're not moving ahead physically. Mars, physical energy, we may not be making as much progress as we'd like to make. And so the real problem with the sluggishness of February is dealing with our own sense of frustration, our own sense of urgency of what something didn't happen and we want to make it happen and we want to make it happen now, of jumping in and making the airplane reservations on a trip that we've been thinking about because all of a sudden we panic and think, oh, I better do this tonight, and boom, it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you make your reservations and you wake up the next day and you realize you made them for the wrong city, or on the wrong date. Typical Mercury retrograde thing. So part of this period of time, January, February, March, even April, is in some ways there's a huge, kind of think of standing in the ocean with the tide going out and then a huge wave coming in, but the undertow still is pulling out. There's cycles within cycles. We are in a huge period of time. How many people are here for a first time on Astrology Night? So all you regulars know that Jeff and I have been talking for 2 years and we'll be talking for another 2 years about the intensity of change during this period of time from 2010, 11, 12, all the way up through 2015, 16, 17. It's a huge amount of change that in some ways is very similar, very different, but very similar in its volume and its intensity to the mid-late 60s and even the early 70s, when Uranus, the planet of shock, surprise, and revolution, joined up with Pluto, the planet of transformation and the intensity that comes from the center of a volcano, the underworld, the unconscious. Those two planets, which lined up in the mid-late 60s, now are 90 degrees to each other, creating stress around what's going to make it and what's not. And humans may be included in that. But within this larger period of forward movement and powerful transformation, this January, February, and March and April is it's like an undertow. It's a back swirl in which we have an opportunity to, almost like being in the center of the storm, to look back and say, what's been happening? What's going on? Where has my life been? What's worked? What hasn't worked? And where am I now? And where do I want to go? And how am I going to get there? So this is, I think, really one of the key pieces to this month. Now let's zoom in a little bit and talk about some of the specific dates and some of the specific transitions, although I have to say that as I look at my sheet of what aspects there are this month, with a few minor exceptions like a new moon and a full moon that happen every month, not a lot happens this month. There are some planets that change signs, and these things actually have a little bit to do with that cosmic weather that I was talking about. But for the large part of what we need to talk about, the fact is that that the sun this time of year is moving through arguably the most intelligent and the weirdest sign of the zodiac. Now, before I continue to offend Aquarians, do we have any Aquarians here? Or people with Aquarius moons or rising signs? Okay. All right. Because I'm hoping to offend all of you. Jeff's not here. He can't stop me. So, Aquarius is the water bearer, but it's not a water sign. Okay, that's weird enough to start with. It's an air sign. In astrology, fire, earth, air, and water represent the Jungian archetypes of thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuiting. Water is feeling, it's emotion. Air is rational, logical, movement, it's thinking. Aquarius is the water bearer. In other words, it bears emotions, but it's non-emotional. It's air. Aquarius is intellectual. In fact, it's of all the 12 signs, it's the most conceptual of all of the signs. Gemini is an air sign. It's about the ideas and the communication and language that happens back and forth between two people. Libra is an air sign, but it's more about the aesthetics of ideas and what's a good idea. How do I relate to you? It's that balance of relationship in general. Aquarius, however, is the movement of thoughts between individual and universal ideas. Aquarius is a universal sign. It's about cosmic stuff. I mean, you know, the last three signs of the zodiac, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces, they're the cosmic bullshit signs. And maybe Aquarius has the most of it because it's an air sign. It has to do with language. So the thing is that here we are with the sun moving through Aquarius. How weird is it that we have a holiday that's the Aquarian holiday that celebrates love? That Valentine's Day is a weird holiday because it doesn't, there's my alarm. It doesn't really celebrate the emotional, watery, feeling kind of love. It's more a ritualized idea of love. In fact, as children, we exchange Valentine's cards with Aquarian friends. Aquarius is the network. It's not about any one individual. So, the idea of Aquarius as the sign of social networking is this. Mercury is about thoughts. It's about how we think. But our nervous system is what distributes that thinking. And it's the electrical nature of our nervous system. You know, the symbol for Aquarius looks like electrical current or waves in the air. Here's the thing. Electricity cannot be conducted unless there's water present. That our nervous system works on what's called the potassium-sodium transfer. But it has to be wet in order for the electricity to flow. When it's dry, anyone who's ever lived in like Minnesota in the wintertime where it's really dry and you keep touching anything you touch, you shake someone's hands, you get sparks. Well, that's because the electricity isn't flowing naturally and that the charges build up and then like lightning. Aquarius is like lightning. It's the charge being released. In fact, if you live in the tropics where it's moist and wet, the electricity, the emotions flow more naturally as we get into higher climates where the water becomes locked. It becomes more Aquarian. Now, here's the weird part about Aquarianness. It is the deepest part of winter, meaning it's the middle part of winter. It's halfway between the first day of winter and the first day of spring. But the sun begins to start coming back quickly, and so we get inklings of the future. And Aquarius is a sign of the future. So we have the sun moving through emotionally detached Aquarius in the middle of winter where it's colder than it is at other times of the year, and yet there's a part of us that becomes ready for spring. That's one of the weird things about Aquarius. Now, what happens is that that tomorrow Mercury turns retrograde. We're going to now jump up to the chart of where we are now. We have today February 5th, and we can see here that Mercury has moved on into Pisces. But tomorrow, Mercury begins backtracking in Pisces. And last month, we talked about how Mercury would come very close to Neptune. Neptune is the planet of dreams, imagination. Mercury is the planet of intellectual thought, of communication. So we have Mercury moving into Neptune's home planet, where Neptune is now for 14 years. And Mercury almost reaches Neptune. The dream is so close, we think we can reach it. However, starting tomorrow, Mercury begins to turn retrograde, and it begins to back up, and the degrees of Mercury begin to get lower and lower and lower. And you watch the sun in Aquarius, as it moves toward the middle end of the month, it moves closer and closer to Pisces, whereas Mercury is now retrograding starting on the 6th, and by actually on the 12th, Mercury retrogrades back into Aquarius. So again, we may feel a revisiting to the intellectual concepts, the ideas, the thoughts that we had back in January. And then as we continue moving that along, you can see that by February 15th, the Sun and Mercury are aligned in Aquarius, and this may be the last stand, if you will, of the Aquarian energy, because even though Mercury continues to move backwards in Aquarius over the days after that, and by the 18th, the Sun moves on into Pisces, And with the sun in Pisces, we become more dreamy. We become more intuitive. We become less intellectually, we become less a slave to the idea of words than we do to the sense of the dream or to feelings. Now, in between there, we have a very important event, and that occurs on Valentine's Day. And this Valentine's Day is a very interesting Valentine's Day. Maybe they all are. Like, what a horrible thing to do to a relationship. Make it deal with Valentine's Day. Oh, my. Okay, I'll probably get into trouble for saying that. Every month, when the moon is opposite the sun, this is the full moon. And on February 14th, actually, at 3:53 p.m. here in Seattle, those of you on the internet, adjust your time zones accordingly. On Valentine's Day, February 14th, we have a full moon, and the full moon is always in the sign opposite the sun. The sign that's opposite Aquarius is Leo. And here it gets a little interesting because astrologically, the sun is connected with the sign of Leo. The sun is as far away from Leo as it can get right now. And this in astrology says that the sun isn't very strong when it's in Aquarius, in the northern hemisphere. Well, duh. Of course not. But we have the moon now in the sun's sign. And Leo is about heart center. Leo is about I love you, meaning it's about personal, romantic expression of warmth, of love. And so the moon, the full moon, is feeling this personal connection, whereas the sun is saying, okay, I love everyone. It's about humanity. It's, for those of you who are of my age, you remember the 1960s painter Peter Max, who painted these bold paintings. And I remember one of them that it was love. I mean, this was the love generation. And it was love, but it wasn't I love you. It was capital L, capital O, capital V, capital E. It was the Beatles singing Love Is All There Is. That's the Aquarian nature. So on the day of this full moon, we have the sun saying, I love humanity. It's the humans that I have a problem with, the individuals that suck, but humanity is a good idea. Love is a great idea, but this is getting kind of sloppy and mucky and whatever. That's the Aquarian side. It's in love with the ideal, with the sense of conceptual perfection. On the other side, we have the moon going, yes, but I feel the love. I want that connection. I'm connected. And so during the full moon, we have this subject-object difference. We have this kind of, this is the way it is and this is how I feel, and yet there's a polarity and we feel very full with these ideas, with these thoughts, with these feelings. So during this particular full moon, and during every year the full moon in Leo, which doesn't always occur on Valentine's Day, during this full moon we have some other things that are very important. One, we have Mercury, which is retrograding back into the sun, which is exact the following day. Remember, retrograde Mercury comes between the Earth and the sun, which means that it lines up with the sun, but in between the Earth and the sun. So communication is incredibly important. It's focused with the will of consciousness, the sun. However, it's hard to get outside. We may have brilliant ideas, but we may have a difficult time communicating them. The second piece that makes this Valentine's Day so important is that there are harmonious aspects between the sun and Mercury, because they're so close, with Mars in Libra. Remember, Mars is sluggish. It's not retrograde yet. But our physical energy we feel frustrated. We feel Mars is moving this month the speed that Saturn normally moves at. So we can feel physically heavier than we normally might. And yet on this full moon, the Sun and Mercury are making a harmonious trine to Mars, which says, yeah, but the energy is flowing. There is movement. That's the good news. The bad news is that it's at a 90-degree angle to Saturn, although the lines aren't drawn here to the moon. If we were to draw them in, there would be a line here also, because this full moon is square Saturn, and Saturn is the planet of restraint. All right, Saturn, Mars. We have a positive, easy, flowing aspect to Mars, and we have a restraining, constrictive aspect to Saturn. Mars is hot, Saturn's cold. Mars is the gas pedal, Saturn is the brake. Mars is yes, Saturn is not so fast. And because this full moon is connected with both the encouragement, the physicality, and the doing it-ness. Can you put ness? Jeff says I put N-E-S on N-E-S-S on words to make it a noun. The doing it-ness. You're right, Jeff, I do. The doing it-ness of Mars is working. We can actually find the gas. We can get to where we're going. We can do it. However, old man Saturn, the naysayer, and Jeff likes to say, he's not here, so I have to quote him as if he's dead or something. He's not. Jeff likes to say that Saturn's the planet that says no but means yes. Now, this is not about, personal boundaries. This is about Saturn saying, if you slow down and do it right, Saturn says, I'll help you do it even better. Mars wants to rush right in and do it, wants to just take care of it, wants to just be it, wants to go, the gas pedal. But Saturn says, if you have the discipline, if you have the sense of self-restraint, that you actually can achieve more than you would if you just went ahead and did it. So this Valentine's Day, this full moon on Valentine's Day, is really a study in the variation between personal love and social connections, between the self and the community, between what I feel and what the social environment might require or demand. And at the same time, we have this go for it, don't go for it that is happening. And I think that it's really important to keep that in mind. It'll help us make it through this period of time with a lot more grace. Okay, so once we get through the full moon on February 14th, we have that period of time where the sun and the moon are harmonizing with Mars, where we may be feeling in the groove. Even though Mercury is still retrograde, even though Mars is slowing down, we may be feeling kind of like okay with this pace of feeling like we're not getting anywhere fast. The problem is that if we expect to have the same cause-effect relationship between what we normally do and what we normally get back, that's what will frustrate us. That's what will make us come up with the crazy plan to get something going that'll then backfire and make us go, oh yeah, Mercury retrograde, bad planning. So keep in mind that the pace of change through February is slowed down. In fact, when the sun moves, on the day that the sun moves from Aquarius into Pisces, the sun is moving from Aquarius to Pisces, which we talked about. Shh. That's the 15-minute alarm. Which I guess I don't need, do I? You got, okay. So what happens is that on the day that the sun moves on into Pisces, Mercury, which has retrograded back all the way into Aquarius, is now 90 degrees or square to Saturn. This is a bit of back to the drawing boards. Mercury retrograde in itself is kind of a back to the drawing boards. It's a back, more planning, get the information right. But remember, Saturn is saying no. But now Saturn's saying no to Mercury. What does that mean? We can become rigid in our thoughts. We can have a disagreement with someone, and maybe there's something there for us to learn, but we can't open up. We're kind of we're too set in our own ways, and that can become really problematic. And so just as we become, quote unquote, more intuitive as the sun is moving into Pisces, we're also doing a little bit of kind of fearful closing down. And it's a good thing to keep in mind around the 18th to just remember to be open. And we do get a little bit of help over the next few days as the sun lines up with Neptune. The sun lines up with each of the planets, each of the slower moving planets once a year from Earth's point of view. It's not the sun going around, we're going around the Earth, but the sun will line up for a day or two with each planet. And on February 23rd, the sun makes its yearly alignment with Neptune. So let's get that up to the 23rd, and we can see the sun lining up with Neptune. Remember, Neptune is the planet of dreams. It's the planet of imagination. Neptune's the planet of spirituality and delusion. What's the connection? It doesn't mean that if you're spiritual, you're delusional. But what it does mean is that there are things where the imagination rules, and it changes. We don't know where the line is between what's religion, what's dream, what's spiritual, what's just nuts. And in fact, many of the people in our mental institutions are there because of, quote unquote, religious delusions. And so there is a connection, and Neptune is that place where we lose the reality of Saturn and we drift off into the dream, into the imagination. It's incredibly creative, but it's also can be a bit disorienting. And so around February 23rd, give or take a day or two, when the sun lines up with Neptune, these are good days to dream. Don't worry if your technical writing is falling apart a little bit. If you can't tell someone the recipe of the amazing meal you cooked yesterday because you don't know what it was, you just know it came out great. Neptune lined up with the sun is about poetry. It's about music. It's about dancing. It's about dissolving the hard edges of scientific clarity. And that can be good or bad. It can be very frustrating if we're trying to get a handle on reality, but boy, it can be magical if we're doing a little bit of journeying. So this is a very creative period of time. As February moves on, February 24th, we have a little bit of a reality factor as Venus, which we haven't been talking about much. Remember, Venus was retrograde through January, but Venus, since November, has been in Capricorn. Normally, Venus spends about a month in a sign, a little bit over a month in a sign. But because of the retrograde in Capricorn, Venus has been in Capricorn forever. Venus doesn't like being in Capricorn, but she makes the best of it. Remember, Venus is love. It's what you want. It's what you desire. It's warm. It's romantic. Capricorn is practical. It's an earth sign. Capricorn is about rules. It's about status. It's about hierarchy. Venus in Capricorn wants to follow the rules. Now, she can still get what she wants, but she's a bit cooled off. And on February 24th, Venus makes a supportive sextile with Saturn. Saturn is the planet of of cooling off. But here it works. There's a little bit of holding back or self-restraint again through the end of the month when that Venus-Saturn connection happens, where we can really gain from saying no or saying no thank you gently. And it doesn't hurt to say it, and it doesn't hurt the person that we say it to. But during the same period of time, there's something else cooking, and it's a very important piece of something that's sitting in the background. It's been with us for a little bit. And remember I said earlier that this month not a lot happens because the faster moving planets, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, are not moving very fast? because they're either retrograding or turning direct or turning retrograde. However, the slower moving planets are what cook up the biggest storms, even though they don't occur on any one day. And we have this ongoing storm between revolutionary Uranus and transformational Pluto that has been about the Fukushima meltdown, the Arab Spring, the Occupy everything, the economic, the global recession. All of these things are tied. The new laws on marijuana usage, gender equality, these issues that were heightened in the 60s, which are back from the Uranus-Pluto square. Now, this square goes in and out of exact phase 7 times from 2012 through 2015. And the next one coming up is on April 20th this year, 2014. And during that time, Jupiter, which is also a slow-moving planet, will be exactly opposite Pluto and exactly square Uranus. This is important this month because although the Uranus-Pluto is off about 3 degrees now, and some of those bigger issues have just kind of maybe receded back a little bit, the fact that Jupiter is exactly square to Uranus on February 25th. Jupiter is about expansion. It's about big thinking. Jupiter is about idealism, philosophy. It's about how we grow. It's the magnifying lens. Jupiter is opportunistic. It's opportunities. It's optimism. Uranus, remember, is the crazy planet. It's the planet that it's about revolution. It's about change. It's about shock. It's about when the lightning strikes. For that moment, we can see it all. The lightning strikes awareness. It's the light bulb. That's Uranus. So when Jupiter, the planet of expansion, is forming a dynamic square with Uranus, the light bulbs go off. Now this aspect, because it's a slow-moving aspect and because Jupiter does its own retrograde cycle, Jupiter made this first square to Uranus back in late August of 2013. Make a mental note of that date. On February 25th, Jupiter makes its retrograde second square to Uranus. And on April 20th, when Jupiter's going direct, it'll make its third and final square, tying these events of last August, this February, and April into some sort of expansive breakthrough, new ideas, opportunity about doing things in a different or revolutionary manner, except on April 20th, the Uranus-Pluto part of this will be exact also. And in fact, Mars, which will be retrograding, is exact in it, making an exact grand square. You'll hear a lot about this date. It's arguably the most intense day of 2014. You watch the news around mid-April through the second half of April explode in all different kinds of ways. You know, you go through a period of time where the front page of the paper is, talking about, a dog that, rescued someone out of a river, which I think is great and wonderful news, and we should have more of that kind of news. But then you get periods of time where that news is buried in the back because there's so much, crazy shit happening. And I predict, the word predict just means to say before. I predict that toward the second half of April, we'll see a lot more of that kind of stress and pressure globally, economically, politically, socially, and personally. However, right now through February, we have a bit of a breather that culminates at the end of the month with this Uranus square Pluto. And just a couple of days later, on the 28th of the month, we have the Sun that makes a harmonious trine with Jupiter, which is arguably a tremendous opportunity. We see the potential. We're confident. We see the good news that's available, and we're ready to reach for it. Whether or not we get it is not important, but the act of reaching changes our life and can open up new opportunities. And the month ends on that kind of new opportunity, except additionally at the end of the month, we also have a new moon on the last day of the month. And this new moon, kind of to bring that up. This new moon is at 10 degrees of Aquarius. It shows here on March 1st, but it actually is in Redmond. The exact new moon is at 11:59 p.m. on February 28th, which actually sent me on a weird little venture, this exercise this afternoon, because, you know, a blue moon is when you have two full moons in the same month. And I realized that had that, on the East Coast actually, there will not be a new moon in February, because the new moon happened on the last day, next to the last day of January. And so just a weird, bend of the calendar. But this new moon on the 28th of February, or the last moment of the 28th of February, in some ways sets in motion what it is that we'll be talking about a month from now, 4 weeks from now, on March 5th. And that will be the Piscean energy, which is kind of going to replace the intellectual detachment, or the intellectual and emotional detachment that we have now as we're moving through this Aquarius phase. So, closing words, don't be in such a hurry. It's okay if things do not happen as fast as you would like them to happen. Chill out. Doesn't mean be lazy. Do your work, because the work that you do now will come into use as the storm picks up through March and April. And come April, you'll be wishing that in February, when you had the time, that you built the new addition, or cleaned out the closet, or painted the room, or bought, whatever it is that you need to do that you've been thinking about doing. Don't wait. Do it now when the currents aren't as crazy. So thank you all for your indulgence. I know that many of you know the drill. We're going to take a 15-minute or so break. If you want your chart to be one of those considered for the 3 charts that we'll do afterwards, and remember, when we do these as a teaching tool for everyone. Yes, it's cool to have your chart looked at, and it's a taste of what happens when you go to see a real astrologer, but it's really just a taste. It's not the whole deal, so to speak. If you're interested in having your chart considered, put your first name, your birth date, place, end time on a slip of paper, and put it on this table right over here, and we'll have someone pick out 3 of them. We'll reconvene in about 15 minutes, and between now and then, you get to do what you get to do every month here, and that is you get to vote economically. Because, Jeff and I volunteer our time as a community interest to come here and share what we do with you. We do not get paid. We're not looking for payment. We're looking to keep this incredible place open and draw people here. And you can do your job by buying a second cup of coffee, which you may regret at 3 in the morning, but that's not my problem. And also, if there was some gift or something that you were thinking about doing, some birthday coming up, do us a favor. Buy it here instead of buying it at the local chain store. It's like, it's better to use your dollars to vote by keeping some place like Soul Food here in business alive. Thank you. You're all awesome. See you next month. And